Hi, I'm Lenina Rassool, your host on Mental Health Matters on Cape Town TV, where every week we sit down with a mental health professional to discuss all things mental health and more. And today we are speaking about having a suicide safety plan if you find yourself in a space that you can't get yourself out of. Now today we are doing things a bit differently. We aren't sitting down with someone in studio, but we are going to be playing a video by the South African Depression and Anxiety Group who deal with suicide and had a Facebook Live Friday conversation around how to build a suicide safety plan, which are tools and resources to help you if you find yourself experiencing suicidal ideation. After the break, we're going to have a listen to that discussion. But before we dive into that, we're going to play a short trailer from the movie Disconnected, which is about people affected by suicide. Let's have a listen.
The biggest question, and I mean always the suicide question, is why? I mean, it's the most sort of significant. What else do you ask?
We're connecting with people all the time, but in a very superficial way. We don't have deep connections with people. There isn't time for that.
Everything just started going downhill a little bit. You know, I started feeling a certain way about myself, feeling that I'm not worthy to be here.
You're either it or you're not it. So we've slowly built this narrative of unworthiness.
Although she was such a strong individual woman, I think she was so close to my father. She just didn't want life without him.
Families are spreading and becoming disconnected. Friends are having to leave each other. This is a problem in terms of feeling supported and supportable.
I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about my friends. I didn't think about whether people loved me or not. I was just absolutely had to jump out of my skin.
And actually, I didn't even want to go back on antidepressants after my brother took his life. I'd been on them before. It was my therapist and my GP that said, please, please be kind to yourself. Why would you not want to?
Our thoughts go down these very specific ruts. And eventually you become so brain trained into way of thinking, and that's often ruminative thought, unhelpful thought patterns.
When we lose hope, the sense of hopelessness, it all goes away. The human spirit kind of lies on its back and just goes, take me, you know, I'm done. Because your belief system is what anchors you in this world.
Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we are speaking about creating a suicide safety plan. Now, as I said before the break, we are doing things a bit differently. South African Depression and Anxiety Group had hosted a discussion with Tracy Feinstein from SADAG and clinical psychologist Viwe Dweba about suicide safety plans and how to construct that. We are going to play that interview now because it's got lots of important information. So let's go and have a look.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Friday conversation today. Today is going to be a very special conversation because we have Tracy Feinstein, who is actually the SADAG call center manager and has so much information to share, practical information, useful information, and things that, you know, we might not have thought about before. We also have Viwe, who is the clinical psychologist, but unfortunately she can't be here face to face or screen to screen today just because of load shedding. We know this has caused so much upheaval, but it's absolutely fine because we still have her valuable comments in some of her information on video. So that is brilliant. So what I'm going to do just in the beginning to get Tracy, our lovely Tracy, to just introduce herself to everyone listening and watching.
Thanks, Venetia. And welcome to our Facebook Friday team, to everybody who is on the chat today. We're really going to be talking about a really important topic, a valuable topic, and opening the conversation and giving you, if you are experiencing dark thoughts, if you need help, or you may be looking so that you can get information so you could help a loved one, a friend, or a colleague. My name is Tracy Feinstein. I'm the SADAG call center manager, and I'm part of the SADAG team. Thank you.
Lovely. So today we talk suicide safety plan. We've just gone having Suicide Prevention Day on the 10th of September, and we all know that there's so much awareness being created around it. But one of the important factors is actually creating a suicide safety plan. We also had our webinar yesterday in the evening, which was very useful. So please go onto our website, find that webinar and watch it. There is so much information there. We had the lovely Chris Kemp sharing vital information. So let's get started, Tracy. Between you and I think we can really unpack this. So how can a suicide safety plan work for mental health issues? And how do you think this does work? Obviously, based on the conversations that you've had with people.
So I think, you know, it sounds like a magic fix, but it's not. I think the important thing about a suicide safety plan is that it's actually a tool to use in a moment of crisis. So it's not going to take away the problems. It is not going to fix all the stuff you're going through. But it's really important to, when you are in perhaps a better frame of mind, a more positive, a more powerful frame of mind, to know that this issue of wanting to end my life, being incredibly disturbed, being incredibly depressed, when you are in that frame, that's not when you want to put together the safety plan. So the safety plan is something you do before a crisis event happens. And it's really to help you short term to get through the moment. And I think later on, we're going to unpack what are some of the components of the suicide safety plan. What I also want to share in the opening conversation is that so often we at SADAG too have shared a conversation, or we've used words like suicide shouldn't be a secret. So this safety plan concept is really a tool to embrace and share with others, so that there is an element of help where you can settle yourself during a dark, fragile space or a moment in time that you're at. It helps to talk. It helps to listen to somebody who is going through a tough time.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's that speaking around suicide shouldn't be a secret. That's something about having these conversations. And one of the main, I think, hashtags that we're using this year is those brave conversations. To be brave enough to have those conversations and know that when I have these conversations, or when I talk around my feelings around suicidal ideation or my experience of suicide, it's important for me to feel like, you know, people are listening, but from that space of non-judgment and complete support. So I think that's valuable, and I think very important to highlight. And just before we get into the video, what I do think, as you mentioned, the components around, you know, a suicide safety plan, what are some of the examples of coping strategies that maybe someone can list? They can almost make a checklist of this on their suicide safety plan. What are some of those?
So I think there's various components in putting together a suicide safety plan. And I love what you're saying. It's hashtag brave conversation. So this is a time when an individual who may be feeling incredibly dark, you know that you are battling depression, you're battling going into the thoughts of ending your life. But when you're in a good space, this is when you've got to be brave enough to start jotting down the components of a suicide safety plan. And quick things that come to mind are, who can you rely on to talk to? A trusted advisor, a friend, a family member who you can trust. That type of person, write their name down, because when we're overwhelmed, we often forget and we think there's nobody there to help us. On that suicide safety plan should be SADAG's telephone number, or a WhatsApp number, or even an SMS number. Reach out and talk to us so that we could help settle you in that moment of time. I think it's also important to remember to highlight things. Think of 3 things that you're really good at, that you really like, that make you happy. Okay, because again, in a dark moment, in a moment in time when everything is not good for you, you forget about that it's not all dark. So highlight 3 things. What are you good at? What do you like? What are some of your goals for the future? Because that will give you an element of hope. Other tools and techniques that we think of putting into the safety plan are tapping into your hobbies. And very often these hobbies are elements which are in the creative space. So I'm thinking of craft work. I'm thinking of things like artwork. I'm thinking of things like music. There was a great discussion on last night's webinar on the type of music that we listen to. And it's just about the music that connects with you at a moment in time when you're really not feeling that great. I also think it's really important to be able to have in that suicide safety plan, who are the contacts, who are the people that you can trust with as trusted advisors, people that you know you can go to. One of the things is it's not always about phoning a person. It's maybe about taking yourself out of a room or a situation and going into a different space and just sit with somebody, okay? And let that person know, when I reach out and I hold your hand, and I'm just sitting next to you in silence, just do that with me. Just hold space with me. So there's a few elements, and I know that on the SADAG website, we have a downloadable format of a suicide safety plan. So number 1, to sum up, contact names and numbers. Some of the things you're really good at that you like doing, okay? Because that's going to ground you a little bit. Often we feel very anxious when we've got these overwhelming thoughts of wanting to end my life. So what are the grounding techniques, even with breathing, okay, that you could do to get back an element of control? So these are some of the things that you could look at in the suicide safety plan. And I know after the video, we're going to unpack them a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I think that's very valuable. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was thinking, you could add a memory that made you smile, and we're so everyone nowadays are on their phones, right? We're all on our phones. You could have this go-to suicide safety plan on your phone, almost like a speed dial space or a little note thing, or you could be super creative, and I know some people are. You could make your own little infographic thing. I mean,
yes.
The world is your oyster with something like this, and I think the more maybe you put into it, the more valuable it also is for you. So I think that's very important. So thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you. I've learned a few things there as well. I am now going to play the video. So I'm going to put our videos off just so that we can make sure that everything goes smoothly and you guys can listen to Viwe with the umpteenth amount of I want to say it, attention. There we go. That's the word. I was going to say attendance, but that's good. Okay. See you in a moment.
So good afternoon, Viwe. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise with us on this really important topic that is often really difficult for a lot of people to talk about. And I think whenever we use the word suicide, it can evoke people, the fear, the taboo, the stigma. And I think so many people just don't know what to do when we hear that word. What if someone says that to us? And there's still so much stigma around suicide in South Africa. So I thought I would just start off with, from your experience and as a clinical psychologist working with patients, what do you think some of the biggest stigma or fear around talking about suicide that you've come across?
So I think, firstly, thank you for having me. This is such an important topic, and people are often really afraid to talk about it. So one of the things that I've definitely noticed, not just from me, but from colleagues, is really about the stigma around that feeling of weakness. There is the societal perception that once someone has suicidal ideation, they have the wish to escape the difficulty of their lives or the internal pain that they're experiencing, that there is weakness. It means that there is something faulty in your character. There is something of resilience that you don't have. And so it can be really difficult to be honest with our loved ones when we need help, because often the response is, well, why would you do that? What's that going to do to us? Why don't you just, try to be positive? Have you tried focusing on the good things? Have you tried a gratitude journal? And so it can feel really difficult to say, I don't think any of these things are going to work because I'm sitting in this hopelessness and I don't want to be in this hopelessness anymore. Another thing is around talking about suicide. Saying that word exactly is scary for people. So if you're worried about someone that is in your life, I've often found that people don't want to say the word, because the moment you say the word, it feels like you're planting ideas in the person's mind. And that is not a thing. That is not a thing at all. That is such a myth. Because if you are feeling like you need to ask, the thought is already there. You haven't planted the thought there. We can't plant things in people's minds. And so we get scared. We don't want to say the word, because if I say the word and this person tries something, it's because I gave them the idea. And that's not the case at all. So I think it's those two things, like this idea that if you have suicidal thoughts, you are weak. And the second thing is, if I say the word suicide, if I ask someone about it, then I'm planting ideas in their mind.
And I really loved what you said around weakness, because I think that just shows us the stigma around mental health, but also suicide, that people who are in that space, who think about ending their life, that it is a weakness, that they're taking the easy way out, or it's a cowardly decision. And we obviously know that that's a huge myth, but I think that's so important to highlight, that we often think less of when we're talking about it. And from your experience, when we're talking about a suicide safety plan, which is really, it could be a mental health safety plan, anyone could put one together. What have you found has been really helpful when you're dealing with people who are feeling suicidal, who maybe have attempted suicide before? What are kind of the key elements that you suggest including in a suicide safety plan?
So one of the first things that's really important is about separating sort of stages of suicidal thinking. So the first thing is, there is suicidal ideation. So when we do our risk assessment in therapy, or when you're doing consultations in a hospital, you're looking for three things. You're looking for the ideation, so the thoughts, the wish to escape. You're looking for intent, wanting to do something. And then you're looking for the plan. So I want to do something and I know how I'm going to do it. So these are the three elements we're looking at. And so if we're at suicidal ideation, but there's no intent and there's no plan, often what we're looking at is exactly that, the wish to escape. And having a space where you can safely talk about it is really important. So this could be therapy, this could be counseling at work, this could be someone you love, that you trust, to say that everything is so overwhelming, everything feels so big that I don't want to be here anymore. I just wish that I could not be here. And often when you find the wish to escape, it's not perhaps the wish to die specifically, It's about wanting to escape the difficulty. And you find that if you took away the pain, if you took away perhaps the social circumstances someone is struggling with, that wish to escape would also leave. It would also disappear. Once we're at intent and once we're at the ideation and the intent, that is the point where you need some professional intervention, definitely. So I definitely recommend finding a therapist, even if you find like a registered counselor, or at work, if there is some sort of employee assistance program, that is where we need help. So one of the important things is about being able to assess where you're at. So where are you on the spectrum? And depending on where you are, that is what informs what it is that you can do. The most important thing I
So sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It seems like it's lagging a little bit. So it's a little bit of buffering. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 seconds and then continue.
think for me as well is about having someone you trust, having someone that you love, that you can confide in, someone who can hold space for you in a non-judgmental, safe way. So often, like when we do our safety plans in therapy, one of the things we talk about the very first time I see you, so I will tell you that sessions are confidential, except in exceptional circumstances. One of the limits to my confidentiality is if I worry that you might hurt yourself, then I would have to break confidentiality. At that point, we need to talk about who is that person that we would contact. So that would usually be like your emergency contact, your next of kin. And often we think like your next of kin or your emergency contact has to be a family member, like a blood relative, and it doesn't have to be. It has to be, and I specifically say, if I worry that you might hurt yourself, who is someone that you trust enough for me to talk to? And at all times, I will do this as a collaborative process where if I have concerns, if I assess you to be at risk, then we will talk about who can help to keep you safe. And if there is no one in your life, then you need to make sure that you have all sorts of emergency contacts. So Lifeline, SADAG, to make sure that you have those, that even if in the middle of the night something happens, or you feel completely overwhelmed by the wish to end your life, then you can contact those numbers. So always having like a SADAG or a Lifeline, but an emergency line, but also having a trusted person in your life. It could be your best friend. It could be your parent. It could be your sibling. Often I find that people feel the safest with their age mates. So it's usually a best friend. It's usually a sibling. So just making sure that you establish that as well. Who is your person? And then having the helplines, very important as well. It's also important to know where your nearest hospital is. So where's the nearest hospital where you can literally go there? Can you drive yourself? Can you catch a taxi? Can you catch an Uber? That if you feel like you are completely unsafe in yourself, where can I go?
Welcome back. You're still watching Mental Health Matters, and we are speaking about a suicide safety plan and how to develop one. Now, we have been playing out a video from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group where they speak about the process for creating a suicide safety plan. And before the break, we ended off with clinical psychologist Viwe Dweba, who was speaking about 3 main things that it is important to have. 1 is to have someone to call. 2 is to do something comfortable or comforting to you. And then 3 is to know where your closest hospital is. We are going to play out the rest of that video with the extra information. Let's have a look now.
So having those 3 elements as well, but also having some soothing things. So often, again, like this is the stuff around myths around mental illness, right? That you need to just shake it off. You need to be okay, think positively, get yourself a gratitude journal. And while there are merits to things like gratitude journals, it's kind of like trying to heal a broken leg with like vitamin D, when what you need is a cast. So it's about knowing what are the things that I can use to help myself, to soothe myself. You are allowed to soothe yourself when you are sad. It's not weakness to soothe yourself when you're sad. So having comforting things around you as well. Do you have a soft blanket? Is there something in particular that you really enjoy eating that gives you sort of the warmth of home or the warmth of safety? And often, if there is a series that you've watched before that you usually just like binge watch because you know it and it kind of helps you to fall asleep, that kind of series or that kind of movie, then those are really helpful as well. We generally think of it as like unhealthy escapism, when what it can be is a really important break from the intensity of your feelings, to allow yourself that time where you can just sort of mind-numbingly watch something on TV. That is okay. You are allowed to soothe yourself when you are sad. So having some things around you that feel familiar, that feel comforting, that feel soothing, that is important as well. It's about knowing where your nearest hospital is. It's about having emergency helplines. It's about having your person that you trust.
I love all those ideas, and I think it's again just giving permission to try these soothing techniques and tips, and to really almost make this go-to list. And I think it's so helpful in putting this together. So even from you sharing, we're going to be adding that into kind of a template that people could fill in, and kind of have all that information there. So this is really some really great ideas. Thank you for that. When you mentioned having that kind of go-to person, that person that you trust enough, and some really great tips about best friend or sibling, because sometimes having to phone mom or dad in a crisis can be daunting and scary. What are they going to say? But I think that's a really, really helpful tip, is having that person. If you're phoning someone on your safety plan that is someone that you trust, and you're having to say, I'm not doing okay, how do you suggest starting that conversation? Or what would you say? Sometimes even just saying the words like, I'm thinking of killing myself, I need your help, might not be the words that you feel comfortable with saying, and you don't want to scare them. How do you suggest someone who's phoning their trusted person, what could they say?
So if you're feeling like you might hurt yourself, but you're afraid to say those words, then it could be helpful to communicate what you need. So saying that I feel like I'm in a really dark space and I don't know how to help myself through this moment. And I was wondering if we could just chat on the phone. I was wondering if you could come over and I come over. So if you're afraid to say those words, then communicate what it is that you would like to get from this person. When I say would like to get, I mean what kind of support you'd like to get from the person. But often the best way is always to just say the words. And if this is your person, this is your chosen person, then this is the person you'll feel safest to speak to about what it is that you're struggling with, so that the relationship is safe enough for you to actually be able to say the words. And often, because when we're in those dark spaces, right, because suicidal ideation, we often think of as just like some random attention-seeking thing, again, such a dangerous myth, when what that is a symptom of severe depression. So by the time we get to ideation, you've already been depressed for quite some time. And part of the symptoms of depression is that feeling of hopelessness, feeling like nothing I do is going to help, but there's also that feeling of worthlessness, and the feeling that you are burdening the people around you. And so it can be difficult to imagine that you can say the words to someone you love without thinking that this person is going to feel completely burdened by me. And when you're in that dark space, it can be really hard to trust that your relationship can hold you in that way. So it's also important for us to remember that, to remember the fact that the darkness of depression changes everything. It changes how you see everything. It changes how you see your relationships. And we can really underestimate how much the people who love us can hold for us. So if you're afraid to say the words, communicate the kind of support you need. But the likelihood is that you're probably feeling that thing of, I'm a burden to the people who love me. And so you underestimate just how much this person can hold for you.
And we get that so often, is that feeling of, I don't want to burden someone. I don't want to have to like offload all my problems to them. And I think also just a comforting thing is that give that person a chance to be there for you and to help you. Because I think also they just need to know when to step in, what your needs are and how to do that. And they really want to give them, that chance. It's not a burden. And I think that's an important point. And we can go on for hours and hours. And I just wanted to ask the last question that we had received is from someone who's a loved one or a friend who's saying, how do I introduce the idea of a suicide safety plan to a loved one who has attempted to take their life, but they're still embarrassed to talk about it? How do I, as a friend, kind of put one together with them? How do we navigate that?
So there will be that feeling of shame, like a whole lot of shame around having suicidal thoughts, around having to explain to people why it is that I tried to take my own life. Like, one of the things that I've absolutely noticed in all, like, because I've worked in hospitals quite a bit as well, doing consults with patients who attempted to take their lives, and now you are the first person to talk to them about it. And one of the things that I've found is the biggest thing is that feeling of waking up with your family surrounding you and the absolute gut-wrenching hot shame that people experience. And that shame can be very, very difficult to climb out of, to ask for help. So the best thing that we can do for the people that we care about, that we're worried about, is to walk in yourself as someone who's not embarrassed to talk about it, as someone who has no shame about it, as someone who completely accepts this person as they are, with their struggles, with their pain. So to actually say the words, openly talk about it, like, friend, or, sis, I'm worried about you. I care about you and I want to be here for you. And I know that at times it can be really hard for you to feel safe. It can be really hard for you to try to find things that can help you cope with being here, especially with how you're feeling or how difficult things are for you. So I thought that maybe we can sit together and we can put something together to help to keep you safe, to help to support you, especially in those moments where you feel like you can't carry yourself at all. But to be very open about it and to first and foremost communicate the intent behind it. And the intent is, I want to help you put something together that can hold you when you feel like you can't hold yourself.
Wow, Viwe, you've given me goosebumps, because I think this is just, it gives us words and a language to use to have these brave conversations. And I think it breaks down the barriers and the obstacles to the loved one's support side, but also giving ideas for someone who's in that moment on what to say and how to communicate that.
And that was a conversation from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group's Facebook Friday live conversations around a suicide safety plan. And now joining us to finish off this conversation is Venetia Gordon, who is the operations manager at SADAG. Venetia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and replaying the Facebook Friday that I think is so important.
It was, I have to say, when I watched it in preparation for the show, as you know, I called SADAG and I just said, we need to get a lot of this narrative out there. And so we've listened to this great conversation about, what people might be going through, how to reach out, how important it is to have resources and tools close by. And I wanted to sort of, Venetia, with us closing off this conversation, is to speak about what a supportive environment looks like once someone has reached out. And often I'm very sort of fascinated by that space. I think that sometimes we don't reach out because we're not sure what that looks like. And I think because we speak about mental health so little, it also means there's less conversation about support services. So to start with, SADAG provides support to people who are in crisis in terms of their mental health, and we are encouraged to keep the SADAG number close, as we've had in the video, and to call if we feel we are sort of in a space that we can't get out of. What would it look like to make a call to SADAG? Who's on the other end of the line?
So I think that's such a good question, because it's so important to know who you're reaching out to. And SADAG has these 24-hour helplines that are available through public holidays, weekends, 7 days a week. And you'll always find a counselor on the other end that can give you information, that can help you navigate, the different ways to reach out for help. And not only do we have the helplines where people can call in, because I think it's so important to know that, yes, the numbers are 0800, yes, somebody can call and it's free for you to call, but there's also other avenues. There's the SMS, so you SMS us and a counselor will be able to connect with you. You can also WhatsApp us and have that initial conversation just around, what is and what you can expect and what there is available. And also just maybe, going onto our website. We know that the website, and I can say this, it's very messy. There's a lot of information there, but the information is so vital. It's those videos, it's those toolkits. So just trying to increase your knowledge base. And you're absolutely right, is that we are not having, as much as SADAG tries to have these conversations everywhere, in every sort of avenue, there isn't enough. There isn't enough awareness around mental health and suicide. It has to be that we're changing that narrative, having these conversations, and almost on a daily basis, asking people, how are you doing today? Are you managing? And also allowing them to actually come back and say, I really haven't had a very good day today. My mental health is not doing okay, and what can I do about it, to have these conversations?
I love that you said that, and I'm remembering also just going back to something, I think it was Viwe that was saying, people also just struggle with saying the word suicide. And I have to say, I felt it myself just in preparation for the show. Every time I have to say it, it's something, mental health is becoming a bit more acceptable, especially with COVID. But suicide is still, it's just not just got so much stigma attached to it, but I think so much emotion and so much fear sort of attached to it.
Absolutely.
Yes, I also wanted to ask, so one of the other questions that Viwe brought up was, one of the other tools that would speak to a trusted friend, have SADAG's numbers close, and then also have the numbers and locations of hospitals close to you. And I was particularly struck by that because, for many of us, again, access to mental health care, access to health care in South Africa especially is also low. So I wanted to sort of throw a question out there, what does it look like if we go to a hospital? I mean, if I was struggling and I'm thinking about, walking into an emergency room for a thing that is not a broken leg or a physical, could you tell us a bit about what that might look like?
Absolutely. And I think that's a very good question, because it is that our healthcare system is not doing exceptionally well. And it is hard for a person that doesn't have a broken leg to go into casualty and say, I'm at risk, I'm not feeling well, I'm not doing well, I might be harm to myself or others, and I need some sort of assistance. And I think that's where also SADAG comes in, is that if you phone in and you're speaking to a counselor, they can help you navigate that, telling you, what you're going to expect there, what can you do there, what are the processes that you can follow when you get to the hospital. So speaking to the person in the front, letting them know, and just being aware of what the reality is, that you might have to wait in a long line, you might have to wait for a few hours, how you can also, mentally prepare yourself for these sort of processes that might be. And also, who are you going to see first? You might see a nurse first. You might see a doctor first. You're not going to just see a psychologist as soon as you walk in and say that I'm not doing okay. And often maybe just giving that extra information. And I know that, explaining the role of a psychologist, a role of a social worker, a role of an OT, a role of a psychiatrist. These counselors can help you understand that, because often I think a lot of the stigma associated with mental health and suicide is often about not knowing what their role is, not knowing what you can expect in your first therapy session. So that almost is like, oh my goodness, I'm going for therapy, but I don't know what to expect. So just prepping yourself and understanding a little bit more. I always say this, and I think I say this in almost all the interactions I have, is that knowledge is definitely power. The more we know, the more we can be aware about.
I think that's such a great issue. I want to thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think, and if I may ask, especially pointing people to where to go for the correct help, because we all know also the internet can be a very tricky place. And there is both, it's the one place people often turn to. And so you could very easily end up on SADAG, or you can end up on different other articles depending on the words that you are inputting into the algorithm.
Yes.
And so I want to thank you for sort of pointing that out. There's also, I just want to ask a little bit about psychiatric care. And so I know you've told us you're going into the hospital and where to go and to not be ashamed. And I love that you've encouraged sort of the explanation of what different role players. You've brought in different role players. There's counselors, there's social workers, there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists, and many people don't even understand the difference between that. And then also a doctor and a GP. There's so much stigma around psychiatric care. There are urban legends around psychiatric care, and there are lots of horror movies made around psychiatric care. I actually just wanted to sort of bring it out and say it. And we've got 3 minutes left, but I just wanted to ask you if there's any context that you can give to our audiences around that, not just for those who are struggling and afraid of it, but also for those who know people who are actively accessing psychiatric care right now. What is a frame that we can think about it in?
I think, this makes me think about the fact that when we think about psychiatric care, and when absolutely we're watching movies and it's very dramatic, it's very looming and very negative actually. But I'd like to touch on just one thing, and just to maybe conceptualize it, is that when we feel ill, so say for example, we're tired, we're thirsty, we know that our sugar levels are not so great, we go to our GP. Right? We go to our GP, and our GP says, okay, we're going to test your sugar level, we're going to test your pressure, and we're going to see what is wrong. And it turns out that you might be diabetic. The doctor then gives you a treatment plan. He tells you, okay, this is your eating plan, this is the medication that you're on, this is how much you must take, and you do that, right? It's the same with mental health. It's the same with anxiety. It's the same with depression. We need to think about it in that manner. We are increasing the quality of our lives by seeking treatment, by going to a psychiatrist and adhering to our medication, by going to a psychologist and doing that talk therapy where you're getting that interaction, by going to different professionals or even a registered counselor where you can interact with them depending on what you're needing, obviously, but getting your treatment plan. And that, I think, is so important, is that we need to normalize it in such a way where if diabetes medication and routine and treatment is okay, so can mental health. It's the same thing. It's just that we're treating a different area of our body. And I always like to pick that up.
I think that's a great analogy. I also love using, it points to the problem that we have to use these physical analogies to give people a frame for mental health. But I myself, I often will say, I have to sometimes trick myself and say, if I'm having a really bad day, if this were a tummy bug and I could not leave the toilet, I would have to call in sick. And so what is happening in my brain is sort of similar to that, and what is happening in my body is similar to that, and I cannot actually, leave my house or work under these conditions. And so trying to give myself a frame for thinking about it in the right way. I want to thank you so much, Vanisha, for joining us. This was really, really helpful and useful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And we need to take a short break now, but we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You are still watching Mental Health Matters, and we have been speaking about creating a suicide safety plan in case you find yourself in a space or in a deep dark hole that you cannot bring yourself out with. Now, usually here on Mental Health Matters, we would end off the show with some last words from our guest. But as you can see, we've been doing things a little bit differently, and I decided to end the show with some last words by myself. And the reasons for this is that about 7 months ago, my brother, Lenina Rassool, took his own life. And it's still very recent, and I hadn't planned to come onto the show and speak about this. But after I watched the segment by the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and I heard Venetia say that suicide should not be a secret, I thought that I had some sort of responsibility to come here and speak about it. Now, my brother's death has not been a secret, or the way he died. But one of the issues that I think I have faced, and that our family and our loved ones and our friends have faced, is how to speak about this thing. We heard the clinical psychologist Viwe say, sometimes you can't say the word suicide. And that has been the case for me. As I'm sitting here, I'm feeling all of the things that they are talking about. I'm afraid right now, as you can see, that people are going to judge us by what happened. There are levels of shame. There is a lot of blame, even though the first thing that people said was that nobody should blame themselves. And there is so much guilt attached to it. You listen to narrative like this, and the only thing you can think about is what you should have done, or could have done, or should have seen, and didn't see, and that it's too late. And so, on this show here today, all that I can offer, because I'm not the expert, and we've already heard from the experts, but I can offer solidarity. When we think about shame, again, Viwe said, often in a suicide attempt where someone has survived, a moment for them is waking up and seeing themselves surrounded by family, and sometimes feeling a lot of shame around that. I want to address that, and I want to stand in solidarity with all of the family members who have had somebody that attempted and survived. Sometimes there's a suicide attempt and the person doesn't wake up, as was our case. And there's a lot of shame attached to that. I'm going to be really honest and authentic here. I feel every time I say these words that I need to explain ourselves. I need to say that we were not angry with each other when this happened. There was no big fight in the family that preceded this. I feel like I need to defend myself because my brother felt he couldn't come to any of us. But as we've heard here on the mental health show, sometimes people feel so lost that they feel they can't be with anyone. They can't approach anyone. They can't speak to anyone. Something else that Viwe said in the interview was that sometimes they feel like they might be a burden. And so I want to say for those who are struggling, that right now where we are, we would welcome that burden. I'm not the expert, and I can't end off with any expert narrative about what is right and what is wrong and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But I can sit here and say that over the past 7 months, we have interrogated so much what needs to be done for us to be able to speak about mental health better. Some of the things that I have read, one of the books that I'm reading is about wayfinding. And what that means is about how people get lost. And so I am sharing with you something that I read, which is the only way I can frame this when I think about my brother. In this book, they speak about when somebody gets lost in a forest or a city, or as a result of mental health, like dementia. When you don't know where you are, it means that you can't locate yourself. And just a month before my brother died, I was lost. And I was suffering a severe depressive episode. And I remember feeling as if no single place or no single person was safe. I felt like I didn't know how to explain what was going on inside of me because I looked fine and I was still going to work. And I remember sitting down with sheets of paper and writing lines and lines of pages, really simply, that I am Lenina Rassool, and I was born in Westridge, Mitchells Plain, and my mother is this person, and my father was this person, and I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. And the point of that exercise I have surmised was to try to locate myself, because I was feeling lost in this world, even though I was surrounded by the names, the people whose names I was writing down. There's a line from the book that says, when you are lost, no place seems safe. And I think with depression, it is the same. When you are lost, everything and everyone seems scary. And so I am sharing my journey with you to try to break the stigma around mental health and around suicide. Nothing will bring my brother back, but the least we can do is learn from this experience. When we spoke about the suicide safety plan, the 3 things they spoke about was do something comforting, whether that is writing lines and lines and lines and pages of pages, reminding yourself who you are and where you are. Reach out to someone you love and trust, and if there is nobody that feels safe, you can phone the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, you can phone Lifeline, you can seek out someone or something or a holding space in your community that is going to hold that space for you. And you can find out where your closest hospital is, no matter how scary or shameful that seems. And that is what I can offer. Lostness is scary, but if you can find just one road sign somewhere that can lead you out, it will be worth it. And so that's all we have for today on Mental Health Matters. I am Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.